When I handed the keys to that $250,000 car to my wife, it wasn't to see her happy. It was to see her sincere. The scene looked like something out of a perfect American family commercial. A large garage in our Austin home, late afternoon light hitting the bright hood, neighbors passing slowly just to try to figure out what was going on. She walked out the front door with that trained smile, the kind of smile that worked well in Instagram photos. But the eyes gave everything. It was no surprise, it was confusion. It was as if her head was doing the math that didn't add up, trying to understand why I would be giving such an expensive gift, right at that strange stage of our marriage. She approached slowly, straightened her hair and gave me a quick cold hug as if doing the minimum not to look ungrateful. I felt the expensive perfume that I paid for myself. I felt her body rigid, as if I was being watched by someone other than me. I rested my hand on her back and for a second almost asked if he was looking out the window, if the friend who appeared in so many deleted messages also thought that car was a good deal. But I swallowed it all. I was silent, but inside me something screamed. Instead of confronting, I just said, "It's all yours. You deserve it." She forced a laugh, fiddled with the cell phone screen as if checking nothing, and replied, "You're weird, but thank you." At that moment, looking at her reflection in the car window, I was sure of one thing. My wife wasn't thrilled with the gift. She was trying to figure out what I knew. And I knew much more than she imagined. A few months ago, any distracted husband would have thought it was paranoia. The cell phone always facing down, the quick trips to the market taking an hour longer, the whispered conversations in the hallway when he thought I was in the home office stuck in a meeting. I was a businessman, more than $500,000 a year passing through my hands, accustomed to reading contract, expression, intention. If I learned anything, it was this. People lie with their mouths, but the body always delivers. She ran her hand over the steering wheel, feigning excitement, and asked if she could take a ride. I nodded, opened the door for her, and watched as she settled on the white leather seat. I knew that model, that luxury package, every detail. I also knew the exact portion that would fall every month. I wasn't just buying a car, I was buying time. I let her start the engine, open the garage door, and leave with a little more force than she needed, as if she were running away from a question I haven't asked yet. At that moment, I stopped being a victim. I became an observer. When the sound of the engine was fading down the street, I went back into the house and closed the door slowly. The room was too tidy, smelling of expensive candles in an environment prepared for photo, not for real conversation. I sat on the couch, pulled out my own cell phone, and opened the folder with the prints, the records, the statements. I had copies of emails that she thought were deleted, account movements that didn't match her pattern, messages that I managed to recover from our family plan, with that unknown number that always appeared at night, after I said I was going to work a little more. They had greed. I had the documents, and that $250,000 car was not a gift. It was the final bait of a game she didn't even realize she started. The ironic thing is that for everyone out there, I was the perfect husband. 48 years old, stable businessman, good house in a condominium neighborhood, 2 children in college, family photo smiling on Thanksgiving, backyard barbecue in the summer, trips to Florida at the end of the year. I was the quiet guy who solved everything calmly, who paid the bills on time, who gave a good tip when I went out to dinner. No one imagined that. Inside that house with a white fence and cut grass, the marriage was rotting in silence. And much less did they imagine that I already knew the names, the places, the times. As she drove the new car around town, probably sending a picture to someone, I remembered the first time I felt something was wrong. It was not a message on the cell phone, nor a suspicious call. It was a simple detail. She stopped caring about my opinion. The clothes she chose, the outings with her yoga friends, the trips to help her sister in another city. Everything started to be decided without me being part of it. I became a decoration, a name on documents, a face in a family photo. When a person stops including you in the small things, it's because they're already taking you out of the big ones. The car was my way of saying, without saying anything, I know. I know how much silence is worth. I know how much lies are worth. I know how much broken trust is worth. She thought she was gaining freedom on 4 wheels, but I knew I was delivering something that would protect me up front. The installment was in my name, the insurances, the guarantees, the discreet trackers that she would never think to look for. It wasn't just ostentation. It was strategy, and I wasn't playing in the dark anymore. When the sound of the engine returned to the street a few minutes later, I had already put everything away and leaned back on the couch, with the television on any channel, just to maintain the appearance of normality. She entered the house with the same smile as before, but now with a different brightness, a little nervous. He spoke quickly, saying that the car was amazing, that I didn't need to do that I was wonderful. I responded with a simple, "Glad you liked it," and let the silence fill the rest of the space. I realized that I didn't have to win by shouting. I just needed her to keep thinking I couldn't see anything. Because in that game, those who talk too much give themselves away, and I was ready to see how far she would go, believing I was in control. I sat on the couch for a few minutes after she walked in, just watching the way she put her bag on the table and fiddled with her hair as if she needed to pull herself together. It was the kind of gesture someone makes when they return from a conversation they didn't want me to know. She spoke too fast, commented on details of the car as if she were trying to fill the air so that I had no space to ask anything. I let her talk. I let her believe that she was controlling the narrative. At the age of 48, after dealing with so many large negotiations demanding clients and long contracts, I learned that silence is more revealing than any interrogation. And at that moment, sitting there, I was listening to more of what she said. When she went upstairs to take a shower, I stood in the living room looking at the clock. The car had a tracker, and I could already check where she had been. It was not gratuitous distrust. It was the result of months of watching changes that didn't match the woman I met when we were still young in Boston, before we came to Texas to try a more comfortable life. The woman who shared with me worries about bills, the future of her children, plans for when we retired, suddenly seemed interested only in being distant, and not far from me physically, distant from me emotionally, as if I had become a burden. While she was in the shower, I checked the records one more time. She had passed by the same street where a man whose name I already knew lives. He worked as a financial consultant and frequently appeared in messages that she deleted. I didn't need to see the words to understand the context. Who always erases hides. Those who hide fear. And those who fear, it is because they did something that they could not explain. I wasn't angry at that moment. The anger had passed weeks before. What I felt now was clarity, and clarity sometimes hurts more than any truth. When she came down the stairs wrapped in the towel, she asked me if I wanted to order something for dinner. I looked at her as someone who looks at a person who thinks they're playing a role. The light, carefree, almost affectionate way did not suit the woman who treated my touch as a nuisance in recent weeks. I just replied that I wasn't hungry. She insisted a second time, perhaps trying to act like we were in a normal moment, but I refused again. She then took out her cell phone and said she was going to ask for something. I paid attention to the way she typed. Fast, tense, looking at me from time to time as if trying to measure if I was suspicious. I kept my face neutral. She probably thought I was the kind of man who would never suspect anything because I'd always trusted too much. It was true. I trusted more than I should. Trust was not my mistake. My mistake was not noticing the change at the right time. Now, however, I was attentive to every detail. When she finished eating, she went upstairs early to sleep. She said she was tired. I sat in the couch another hour before going upstairs. Every step I took on the stairs felt heavier than the last. It was not the weight of betrayal. It was the weight of knowing that the life I had built was at risk because of someone who didn't value even half the effort I put in for years. I entered the room and she was already asleep with her back to me. The cell phone was charging on the bedside table, face down, as always in recent months. I lay on my side and stared at the ceiling. As I breathed slowly, thinking about what I was going to do next, something inside me became clear. She thought she was acting in the shadows. She thought I was blind. But the truth is that at that very moment, I had more information than she imagined. She had greed. I had the documents. And documents do not lie, do not manipulate, do not try to reverse blame. They only show the truth. In the morning, I woke up before her and went to prepare coffee. She came downstairs a few minutes later, putting the cup in the sink without looking me in the eye. He asked if I had slept well. I said yes. The short answer seemed to bother her, but she disguised it. He sat at the table and fiddled with his cell phone with that care of someone who has a lot to hide and little control over what can be discovered. I observed everything calmly. It was like watching someone set up a house of cards on a shaking table. She didn't know that I already had access to what I needed. She didn't know that I was no longer trying to save the marriage. I was trying to save myself. And the truth is that at that moment, I realized that my life was changing much more than she imagined. Nothing at that breakfast was normal, nor silence, nor the way she avoided talking about the car, nor the way he changed the subject whenever I tried to ask a casual question. It was like seeing two people in the same house but living completely different realities. She lived under the illusion that she controlled everything. I lived in the certainty that it would end in revelation, and the revelation was getting closer and closer. When she left for work that morning, I stood in the doorway watching the new car, still shining, pull away down the street from the condo. It was curious to see how an expensive gift could carry so much silence inside him. In her mind, that car was the sign that I was still invested in the marriage, that I still trusted her, that I was still the predictable man she had known years ago. She had no idea that I was past the doubt stage. I was in the confirmation phase. And every move of hers, every uncomfortable look, every small change in behavior only reinforced what I already knew. I went back inside the house and went straight to the office where I kept the folder with the copies of everything. I sat down, opened the documents that were separated, and began to reread the recovered messages, the bank statements, the hotel reservations that she said were company events. There was no way to justify that, not in front of a judge, not in front of anyone. She was so busy living a double life that she thought nothing would leave a trace. But in the United States, everything leaves a trace. Card, location, digital signature, synchronized emails. Those who live on lies always forget that technology does not forget anything. As I analyzed everything once again, I realized that my biggest surprise was not the betrayal itself. The pain was gone. What was left now was a kind of quiet coldness, that feeling that I was watching everything from afar as if I were someone else living it. It was strange, but at the same time, liberating. For the first time in many years, I was seeing the situation clearly, without trying to justify, without trying to fix it, without trying to save those who didn't want to be saved. I knew that I would soon have to make a decision. In the United States, divorce is no jokey. It involves patrimony, pension, fair division, and in my case, it would also involve something she didn't imagine, protecting my assets before she tried to hit me financially. The car I gave was just one part of the strategy. It seemed to be present, but it was proof. The contract was in my name, the installments on my corporate card, and any suspicious movement would be seen as an attempt to take advantage. She thought she had the upper hand, but she was nowhere near it. In the middle of the documents, I found something that made me stop. It was a print of a conversation between her and the financial advisor. They talked about the right time and about not wasting the chance. She said that her husband's situation was great and that the return would be great if everything went well. I read that several times. It wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was calculation, it was interest. It was someone planning to take advantage as if my life were a disposable investment. I closed the briefcase, took a deep breath, and stared out the office window. The neighborhood was calm, the kind of calm that only those who live in an upper-class neighborhood know. But inside me, the storm was passing. It was no longer anger. It was a decision. I realized I didn't need to prove anything to her. There was no need to argue, complain, raise voices. I just needed to be ready for the right moment. They wanted to hurry. I had time. I took my cell phone and sent a message to my lawyer asking to schedule a meeting later that week. He replied a few minutes later, saying he would be available on Thursday. I confirmed. When I put the phone on the table, I realized that my hands were steady. There was no tremor. There was no insecurity. It was as if my whole body had finally understood that this chapter was coming to an end. At the end of the afternoon, she called me saying that she was going to be late because she needed to solve company matters. Her voice carried a barely concealed nervousness. Maybe she thought I would be bothered. Maybe he wanted to see if I would question it. I just said, okay. Her silence after my answer said more than any long explanation could say. She expected resistance. He didn't find it. When I hung up, I realized that for the first time in a long time I was in control of my own story. And deep down I knew, the truth sooner or later always finds those who tried to escape from it. She just didn't imagine that the first step had already been taken. And not for her, for me. When she came home that night, I was already sitting at the kitchen table staring at the cup of coffee I hadn't even drunk. She came in loudly, saying that the day had been tiring and that the company was demanding too much. I listened to everything without interrupting. Every word she said felt rehearsed, as if she was repeating a story that needed to be solid enough that I didn't ask questions. But I didn't have to ask anything. I had the answers long before she imagined. She placed her purse on her chair and opened the fridge as if nothing was happening. Then he took a bottle of water and leaned against the counter, looking at me as if waiting for some reaction. I kept my face calm. This silence was more uncomfortable than any confrontation. She asked why I was so quiet. I just said I was tired. It was not a lie. I was tired of carrying a marriage alone, tired of pretending I didn't see the obvious, tired of maintaining a peace that only I took care not to break. She took a few steps towards me, perhaps trying to regain some closeness that no longer existed. Her touch on my shoulder was light, almost automatic. I felt that it no longer came from a real place. It was habit. It was paper. And papers, when worn out, tear easily. I got up slowly and said I was going to take a shower. She nodded, but I realized she was watching my every move, trying to understand why I wasn't reacting the way she expected. The truth is that she got used to a man who always gave in, but that man was no longer there. In the shower, the hot water running down my body made me think about the last few weeks. I thought about the moment when everything started to change, when I noticed that she was smiling at her phone in a way that she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. I thought of the nights when she said she was exhausted but stayed up late in the makeshift office, supposedly reporting. And I thought of the car, which was now a centerpiece in the game she thought she dominated. The gift I gave became the mirror of the truth she was trying to hide. When I left the bathroom, she was sitting on the bed, playing with her cell phone with that exaggerated care. When she saw me, she put the device face down, as she always did. I lay down next to her, but I didn't say anything. The silence between the two of us was so dense that you could feel it. She tried to start a conversation, saying that the car had attracted attention in the parking lot and that some colleagues had praised it. I just replied with a "that's good." At that moment, I noticed that she noticed something different in me, something that didn't match her passive husband before. During the night, I woke up to the noise of her cell phone vibrating. She quickly grabbed the device and turned on her back, as if I hadn't seen anything. It was too late to pretend. The mere fact that she moved like that gave away more than any message could say. She typed something quickly, sighed, and went back to sleep. I lay awake for almost an hour, staring at the ceiling, feeling the confirmation I already carried with me. There was nothing left between us but appearances. The next morning, we decided to have breakfast together, but the conversation was forced. She asked simple questions, trying to make the environment seem normal, but normality had long since died. The coffee tasted like a broken routine. She avoided talking about work, avoided talking about the car, avoided talking about anything that could give rise to questions. The truth is, when someone is lying, they don't fear the truth. He fears the questions. As she walked out the front door, with her purse on her shoulder and her cell phone in her hand, I watched. The car was outside, shining, as if it were illuminating everything she was trying to hide. She looked at me before getting into the vehicle, as if to confirm that I still believed in everything. I smiled slightly, not a smile of confidence, a smile of someone who knows. She got into the car and left without looking back. I closed the door of the house and felt something that I hadn't felt in a while. Peace. Not the peace of a happy marriage, but the peace of those who have finally accepted the truth. The peace of those who know that they no longer need to run after someone who has been gone for a long time, even if they are still inside the same house. And at that moment, as I took a deep breath, I realized that her fall would be at the moment I least expected it, because every lie sooner or later ends up in front of someone who no longer pretends to be blind. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm clock. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't worry. It was just the certainty that this would be the day when everything would change for good. The house was quiet, and for a few minutes I stood at the bedroom door, watching her sleep. The calm face, the hair loose on the pillow. Anyone looking from the outside would think it was a normal scene of a stable marriage. But I knew the truth. I knew that behind that calm countenance there was a sequence of choices that dismantled everything we built together. I went down to the kitchen, prepared coffee, and sat at the table waiting for the clock to mark the time of the meeting with the lawyer. It was not revenge. It was protection. The same protection she used against me, but in a crooked, hidden, planned way. Now I did it the right way, with documents, with evidence. No raising voice, no arguing. I was about to do what she never imagined, take control of my life without warning. When she came down, still sleepy, she said good morning to me as if nothing was happening. I answered the same calmly. She asked if I was going to work earlier. I just said I had an important meeting. She didn't question it, maybe because she knew that any question could open doors that she didn't want to cross. As I drank her coffee, I noticed that she avoided looking me in the eye. Those who fear the truth always look the other way. After she left, I got in the car and drove to my lawyer's office. The building was in a quiet commercial district, one of those where everything seems planned to convey control and order. When I entered his office, I placed the briefcase on the table. He opened it, analyzed every document, every print, every extract. It didn't take long for him to look up and say that the case was solid. More solid than usual in these types of situations. According to him, I had what many people don't have: clear, organized, and incontrovertible evidence. As he talked about asset division, rights, strategies, I noticed that my mind was incredibly calm. It was as if I had trained for that moment without realizing it. For years, I carried the wedding alone, trying to keep everything standing. Now, for the first time, I carried only myself, and that was light. I left the meeting with the certainty that her fall would be inevitable, not because I wanted destruction, but because she herself set the perfect stage for it. She took steps without thinking. She relied too much on her own ability to manipulate. She forgot that the truth always finds a way out, and this time, the exit would be directly on her. When I got home in the late afternoon, I found her sitting on the couch, playing with her cell phone. Seeing me, she turned off the screen quickly. The same routine as always, the same lie repeated with confidence. She asked how my meeting went. I just replied, "Very enlightening." She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes, and I realized that even without knowing what it was about, she felt the change in the air. I had dinner in silence, took a shower, and went to the bedroom. She lay next to me, but there was a huge gap between us, greater than any physical distance. I looked up at the ceiling and felt like the story was coming to an end. Not an explosive end, not a dramatic end, but a precise end. An end signed, an inevitable end. She would never have imagined that the $250,000 car she received with confusion in her eyes would be just the beginning of the final line. She thought she was winning. She thought she was being smart. He thought I was the same absent-minded man he would always trust. But she didn't realize that that same day when I handed the keys to her, I had already made the decision that would change everything. My revenge was not to scream, expel, fight. My revenge was to let her believe that she still had control. My revenge was the truth coming without warning. My revenge was not to fight. It was to let her lose alone. And when the moment came, she would understand in the worst possible way that, in the end, I was always one step ahead. Because while she had greed, I had the documents, and sometimes, the best answer is written in a notary's office.